The world often believes money can buy peace, comfort, and happiness. But behind the walls of the wealthiest mansions, some of the deepest battles are fought silently. This is the story of a fragile young girl drowning in anxiety and the unexpected figure who stepped into her world, not just to care for her, but to transform her life forever. The estate rose like a monument to wealth, towering gates opening to a world of manicured gardens, marble fountains, and a driveway lined with glistening cars worth more than most people's homes. Inside, the hallways sparkled with chandeliers. Portraits of power and prestige adorned the walls, and every corner seemed polished to perfection. From the outside, it was a palace, a place where anyone would assume life was nothing less than a dream. Yet within those golden walls, hidden away from curious eyes, a very different story was unfolding. At the heart of this vast mansion lived a young girl who seemed to have everything the world could offer, yet she carried a burden no amount of luxury could erase. Each day for her began not with excitement but with dread, her small frame curled under heavy blankets in a room that felt more like a gilded prison than a sanctuary. Her heart often raced without warning, panic flooding her chest until it felt impossible to breathe. Sometimes, in the silence of her room, she would press her hands to her ears, trying to drown out the noise of her own thoughts. Despite the toys stacked in every corner, the screens glowing with endless entertainment, and the closet overflowing with glittering dresses, she found no joy in any of it. The more the world tried to give her, the more she retreated, burying herself in shadows. Her parents, consumed by global business ventures, were often absent. They loved her in the only way they knew, through gifts, tutors, and the best doctors money could buy. But their presence was fleeting, their attention divided. Specialists had been summoned one after another. Therapists had sat in plush chairs, speaking softly, offering carefully rehearsed words, but none of them ever stayed long enough to reach her. Each departure left her with a sharper reminder of her loneliness. The treatments were expensive, the routines polished, yet nothing touched the raw ache she carried inside. She learned to hide from the world, locking herself away in her oversized bedroom. The room was breathtaking. Walls painted, with pastel murals, shelves filled with books, a giant canopy bed draped with silk, and endless gadgets humming quietly in the background. Yet she rarely touched any of it. Instead, she would lie flat on her back, staring at the intricate designs carved into the ceiling, her eyes tracing the patterns while her thoughts spun uncontrollably. Hours would pass, and she would barely move, trapped in a storm no one else could see. The staff in the house noticed her silence. Maids exchanged whispers in the hallways, cooks shook their heads softly when her meals went untouched, and guards by the door muttered about the fragility of the young girl who never smiled. Yet none dared to cross the invisible barrier that surrounded her. Fear of overstepping, fear of disrupting the wealthy family's delicate pride, kept them at a distance. And so, though she lived surrounded by people, she remained entirely alone. Her world shrank further each day, her laughter forgotten, her voice fading like a candle struggling against the wind. Sometimes at night she would curl into herself, clutching the edges of her blanket as waves of anxiety crashed over her. Her chest tightened, her breath came in quick gasps, and tears slipped silently down her cheeks. She wanted to call out, to be held, to be told she wasn't broken, but she knew no one would come. The silence of the mansion pressed in heavier than the marble and stone. Just as hope began to feel like a memory, a new figure entered the estate. Unlike the others who had come and gone, this caretaker carried no aura of authority or polished professional distance. She entered quietly, her steps calm, her presence steady. There was no grandeur in her arrival, no show of credentials or degrees to prove her worth. What she brought instead was something entirely different, something that could not be bought. She carried warmth, the kind that softened even the sharpest edges of fear. She carried patience, refusing to rush or demand, content simply to be present. And, most of all, she carried strength, not the kind measured in wealth or power, but the unshakable kind that grows from understanding, resilience, and heart. In that moment, as the mansion doors closed behind her, the air itself seemed to shift. The girl, hidden upstairs, had no idea yet that her life was about to change. No one in the house could predict that the stranger who had just stepped through the threshold would succeed where countless others had failed. For the first time in a long time, the possibility of light breaking into the girl's shrinking world became real. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one truth was already clear. This caretaker was not here to treat her like a patient or a problem. She was here to stay, to guide, and to transform. From the very first morning, the caretaker's presence felt unlike any that had come before. She did not march in with instructions, nor did she sit at a cold distance like so many specialists who had arrived and disappeared. Instead, she settled quietly in the girl's space, not demanding attention, not pushing for words, but simply being there. She would take a chair in the corner of the room and hum softly while folding a blanket, or sit by the window with a book, her presence steady and unshakable, like a lighthouse on a stormy shore. At first, the girl eyed her suspiciously, waiting for the probing questions or the forced cheerfulness she had grown accustomed to, but none came. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable this time. It was safe. Small acts began to ripple through the mansion. The caretaker prepared meals not with elaborate presentation, but with care, placing warm food within reach without insisting it be eaten. She read aloud in the evenings, her voice calm and rhythmic, never pausing to see if anyone was listening, yet always leaving space for the girl to join if she wished. Sometimes she hummed soft songs, melodies that filled the heavy silence with something gentler, something human. Slowly, almost reluctantly, the girl began to notice. She noticed the steady hands that never trembled when she grew restless. She noticed the quiet smile that did not vanish even when met with cold stares. She noticed the calm tone that spoke, as though time itself was patient enough to wait for her. One night, the true difference revealed itself. The girl awoke in terror, her chest tight, breath shallow, panic clawing at her insides. In the past, alarms would have been raised, doctors called, sedatives offered, but this time, the caretaker simply appeared beside her bed, her presence calm as ever. She didn't rush, didn't panic. Instead, she took the girl's trembling hand and whispered simple instructions. "Breathe with me," she murmured, guiding her through the rhythm, inhaling slowly, exhaling gently. At first, the girl gasped, her body resisting, but the caretaker's hand never wavered. Slowly, her breaths began to fall in sync. For the first time in years, the storm inside her chest began to calm without machines, without pills, without strangers hovering over her. When the panic finally faded, the girl found herself still holding the caretaker's hand, and in that moment, trust, fragile but real, was born. Days began to shift into something new. The caretaker introduced small routines, never overwhelming, never demanding. She suggested morning walks in the garden, beginning with only a few steps outside the door. She offered a simple notebook, encouraging the girl to write her feelings, even if it was only a word or two each day. She introduced grounding exercises, pressing hands against the earth, describing the colors of the flowers, counting the sounds in the air. What once seemed like unbearable tasks slowly transformed into manageable steps. Each tiny victory was celebrated not with fanfare, but with a nod, a smile, a gentle acknowledgement that progress had been made. The staff began to notice. The maids who passed by the garden caught glimpses of the girl walking, her eyes no longer fixed to the ground. The cooks whispered when they saw plates returning to the kitchen less full than before, evidence she had eaten more than a bite. Even the guards by the gates, stoic and silent, murmured to one another when they caught sight of her laughter one afternoon, a sound so rare it startled the house into silence. Word spread quietly through the corridors. "She's different," they said. "She's smiling again." For the girl, the changes felt both terrifying and exhilarating. She still stumbled, still battled waves of fear that threatened to pull her back into isolation. But each time, the caretaker was there, steady as ever, guiding her back to calm. The difference was that now, the girl began to believe she wasn't entirely powerless. She could fight back. She could win small battles. Yet the caretaker knew the golden walls of the mansion could only shelter her for so long. Transformation, real transformation, could not remain confined to hallways and gardens. The outside world, with its chaos, its unpredictability, and its judgments, still waited, beyond the gates, and while the girl had made progress, she had not yet faced that storm. Quietly, the caretaker began to prepare her for it. Each lesson, each exercise was not just for comfort inside the mansion, but training for life beyond it. The girl didn't realize it yet, but every walk, every written word, every grounding breath was a stepping stone toward facing the world outside. In the evenings, when the house settled into silence, the caretaker would sit by the girl's side, telling her stories of courage, not grand tales of heroes and battles, but simple stories of ordinary people who had found strength in their fears. The girl listened, her eyes reflecting both doubt and hope. She did not yet know if she could ever be one of those people. But the seed had been planted. The light that had nearly gone out was beginning, slowly, to glow again. And though no one could see it yet, the caretaker knew. The day was coming when the girl would take her first real step beyond the gates. And that moment would be the true, ikat test of everything they had built together. The days in the mansion began to take on a rhythm, no longer defined only by silence and fear, but by the small, deliberate challenges the caretaker gently wove into the girl's life. Nothing was forced, nothing overwhelming. Instead, the girl was invited into simple acts that made her feel part of something, no longer just a fragile figure behind closed doors. In the mornings, the caretaker would guide her into the kitchen, handing her a spoon to stir batter for pancakes or letting her sprinkle sugar on top of fresh pastries. At first, her hands shook, spilling flour on the counter, but the caretaker never corrected her harshly, only laughed softly, turning the mistakes into moments of lightness. In the afternoons, they knelt side by side in the garden, pressing small seeds into the soil, the sun warming their backs. Each flower that later bloomed became a quiet reminder that growth, no matter how slow, was still growth. And in the evenings, the caretaker encouraged her to read aloud, not entire chapters, just a line or two. Her voice wavered, cracked, but over time it carried further, stronger, with less hesitation. These small victories began to chip away at the invisible walls built by years of fear. Then came the moment the caretaker had been preparing her for, the test of stepping beyond the mansion's gates. One morning, she suggested a walk not in the familiar garden, but in a public park, where laughter of children, chatter of strangers, and the unpredictable hum of life filled the air. The girl froze at the idea, her breath shallow, panic already clawing before a single step had been taken. But the caretaker's hand was there, steady, her voice calm. "Remember your breathing," she whispered. "Remember what you've already done." The journey to the park was not easy. The girl clung tightly, her body stiff with terror, each sound a threat, each passing stranger a storm. But she kept walking, her breaths uneven but present, her eyes darting but never closing. For the first time, she stood in the middle of a world that once felt impossible. The first outing ended quickly, but it was enough. The caretaker praised her not for how long she lasted, but for the courage it took to try. The next visit was longer. The girl began to notice details she had ignored before: the laughter of children swinging, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the scent of food drifting from nearby stalls. The fear never fully disappeared, but each time she returned it grew smaller compared to her growing strength. What once felt like a battlefield became a training ground, and though her heart still pounded, she realized she could survive it, she could endure it, and in those moments she was no longer powerless. But progress inside the girl's world meant little if her parents remained absent. The caretaker understood that the greatest wound came not from her anxiety alone, but from the emptiness left by those who should have been closest to her. One evening, she confronted them with quiet but firm truth. Love is not measured in gifts, nor expressed through expensive treatments. Love is presence. Love is listening. Love is showing up, even in the uncomfortable silence of struggle. At first, the parents resisted, uncomfortable with the suggestion that their empire of wealth had failed their child in the most human way. Yet, slowly, they began to listen. Family dinners were no longer formal occasions filled with silence, but attempts, however clumsy, to connect. The parents started sitting at the table with her, asking questions not about grades or achievements, but about her day, her feelings, her fears. The girl, hesitant at first, responded in fragments, then in sentences. For the first time, her parents weren't board members in her life. They were present, trying, learning. Of course, progress was never a straight line. The girl still faltered. There were nights when panic consumed her again, moments when she shut down, days when tears returned. But something had changed. Instead of spiraling endlessly, she now rose quicker. Instead of drowning, she remembered to breathe, to ground herself, to call for help without shame. She stumbled, yes, but she stood again, quicker, steadier, stronger each time, and through it all the caretaker never let her define herself by fear. Fear was a part of her story, but it was no longer the whole story. Yet, as her confidence grew, a greater challenge loomed ahead. The mansion was preparing for a grand charity gala, an event where the world of wealth and prestige would flood its halls. Politicians, business leaders, and celebrities would fill the rooms with chatter, music, and judgmental stares. For the girl, even the thought of entering such a crowd made her heart race violently, her hands tremble as if she were facing a storm greater than any before. She whispered that she could not do it, that it was impossible. But the caretaker saw it differently. This was not punishment, not exposure for the sake of discomfort. It was the ultimate chance to prove how far she had come, the moment where she could step not just into a room full of strangers, but into her own strength. The preparations for the gala filled the house with noise and bustle, but in the quiet corners, the caretaker continued to work with her. Breathing exercises were practiced, grounding rituals repeated, and affirmations whispered until they became second nature. The girl still feared the night to come, but the caretaker stood firm, knowing that within that fear lay the key to her transformation. And though the road had been long and filled with battles, the greatest test was yet to come. The night when the girl would walk not only into a crowded hall, but into the truth of who she was becoming. The night of the gala arrived, and the mansion seemed to shimmer with a brilliance that rivaled the stars themselves. Crystal chandeliers reflected light across polished marble floors, soft music floated through the hallways, and the chatter of well-dressed guests filled every corner with a hum of elegance. Women in flowing gowns glided past, their laughter mingling with the notes of a string quartet, while men in tailored suits exchanged polite conversation and handshakes that carried the weight of business deals and social prestige. For the young girl, standing in her room just beyond the grand hall, it felt like being perched at the edge of a cliff, the ground beneath her heart trembling with anxiety, the very air thick with the noise of a world she had long feared. Her hands shook, her chest tightened, and for a moment she considered retreating, slipping back into the safety of solitude where her fears could not chase her. Yet, beside her, the caretaker stood calm, a quiet presence in the whirlwind of nerves and anticipation. She did not push, did not force, did not scold. She simply reminded the girl of all the steps she had already taken, all the battles she had quietly won in rooms no one else had seen. "You've come this far," she whispered softly, her hand brushing gently against the girl's arm. "You already have the strength. Now, just take the next step." And so, inch by inch, the girl moved forward, guided not by fear nor by pressure, but by the gentle knowledge that she was not alone. The doors to the hall swung open, and the first moments, the crowd blurred into noise. Laughter, music, the clicking of heels, and the murmur of conversation all merging into a wave of overwhelming stimuli. Her mind threatened to pull her back, to convince her that the world outside, her room, would swallow her whole. But she remembered the lessons of the caretaker, the slow, deliberate breathing, the grounding of her feet against the floor, the voice within herself that whispered courage and calm. She inhaled deeply, exhaled slowly, and with each step, she found a rhythm, a balance, a confidence she had not known she possessed. Step by step, she entered the hall. Her movements were tentative at first, but gradually a graceful composure emerged. She lifted her eyes, saw the warm smiles of familiar staff, the encouraging nods of her parents, and began to let her voice find its place. Her words, soft at first, gained clarity and steadiness. She greeted people with polite acknowledgement, returning smiles, offering simple sentences that carried a quiet elegance. The room seemed to pause, the hum of conversation softening as guests noticed her presence. It was not the extravagance of her attire or the glow of the chandeliers that drew attention. It was her, the girl who had hidden in shadows, who had trembled in silence, now stood as a beacon of courage, her very being commanding respect and awe. Across the hall, her parents watched, their expression shifting from concern to astonishment. They had believed wealth, tutors, and specialists could shape their child's world, but they now saw something far more valuable. A transformation, born of patience, care, and love. The caretaker's influence was evident in every controlled breath, every measured step, every steady word. What she had given was not a temporary solution or an illusion of calm. She had given the girl resilience, independence, and the courage to face life on her own terms. For the parents, the lesson was profound. True guidance could not be bought, only nurtured through unwavering presence and belief in someone's potential. The caretaker, standing quietly nearby, understood that her work was never about erasing anxiety. Fear would always exist in some form as part of life's challenges. Her mission had always been greater, to teach the girl to live with that fear, to move through it, to claim her power despite it. And in the light of the gala, amidst music, laughter, and glimmering gowns, the success of that mission was undeniable. The girl moved with a strength and poise that had been unimaginable months before, demonstrating a mastery over herself that transcended the luxury of her surroundings. Though the gala marked a milestone, it was not an end point. The girl's journey was far from complete. The world beyond the estate's walls would continue to test her, presenting moments of doubt, of anxiety, of challenge. But her world was no longer a cage. She had been given the tools, the confidence, and the unwavering support to navigate life's storms. Love, patience, and guidance had reshaped not just her daily existence, but the very foundation of her spirit. As the evening drew on and the guests mingled around her, the girl's eyes shone with a quiet certainty. She had reclaimed her life, and in that moment it became clear that sometimes the most profound transformations do not come from wealth, power, or prestige, but from the quiet, steady strength of someone who chooses to care, to stand beside you, and to believe in you when no one else will.